Hi, this is Kevin Lee with the eMarketing Association. My day job is I run Did It, an 83-person digital first ad agency, actually one that works with HubSpot, as well as some other platforms that are also on Scott Brinker's famous landscape of all the MarTech companies. Scott was kind enough to join me and talk about what's new in the wonderful world of MarTech and the ever-changing ecosystem. I also run Giving Forward, a cause marketing powered nonprofit where we raise money for other nonprofits using cause marketing. So Scott, the first thing is, when I look at your LinkedIn profile, it would initially seem like you're spread really thin, right? Because you've got multiple active roles at the same time, all revolving around ad tech and MarTech. But it also seems like there's some overlap in that Venn diagram about what you have to do every day when you talk to folks in the MarTech ecosystem. So for people who don't know any of your roles, what's your elevator pitch bio?
Wow, yeah. So it's simple. It's basically all MarTech all the time. So the role I have at HubSpot, I'm their VP of Platform Ecosystem. It's all about working with that incredible universe of MarTech and sales tech and all these other SaaS companies to help them integrate with HubSpot. And then once they integrate with HubSpot, finding ways to help promote them, to our customer base. So that's my official job. I've been writing the chiefmartech.com blog for goodness 14 years now. That's the thing that led me to that crazy eyesore of a landscape. Worked with the launch of the MarTech conference as their program chair. So yeah, one way or the other, it's like all MarTech all the time. Right. I'm a really boring guy when it comes down to
it. So one thing that sort of strikes me as I look at those landscapes, and obviously some of those players are at the enterprise level, others bridge the middle down into the SMB as HubSpot does. But I get the sense that there's sort of, for any business, it's like the haves and the have-nots, right? Where there's like this digital divide between those who can afford to really sort of glue everything together and like maybe attach it into their back end business, and those who sort of maybe have one or 2 point solutions, but they're really, haven't gone through a digital transformation. So how do you think about, that from the perspective of, the investment of time and energy for some of the have-nots? How do they go through the decision process of, wait a minute, I've got HubSpot, but which of these other things do I really need? And some of them are expensive, right? So how do you recommend a business owner think through their own digital transformation if they're sort of want to use HubSpot at the core, but then they have to plug into it?
Yeah, well, I mean, ironically, actually, I'm in the school of thought that other things being equal, fewer tools is generally better anyway, in the sense that, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, usually the bottlenecks that people have in being successful with digital marketing are not their technology. It is usually other dimensions of, either having the right talent or being able to connect it to the larger business strategy. And those are the things that if you fix those, even with a relatively simple and modest set of marketing technology tools, you can be very, very successful. Vice versa, you could have all the state-of-the-art technology in the world, and if you don't have those things in place, you're just not going to be able to pull return. So I always advise people to focus on what's really going to be moving the needle. But then, from the technology perspective, I mean, as you do start to see genuine opportunities to either make access a new channel or implement a new tactic or make your internal business operations more efficient for that, it's definitely great about bringing in new tools. But for smaller businesses, even in mid-sized businesses, you're right. They don't want to be in the business of playing enterprise architect and figuring out how the wires connect to each other. And in fact, actually, this is exactly why I joined HubSpot. Was I kind of felt that this is a problem that platforms like HubSpot and the point solution vendors who create a specialized tool, we should be able to solve this so that by the time a customer says, yes, I would like to use this with HubSpot, they can just plug it in, and we've done the hard work to swap the data back and forth. We're not 100% there on that journey. This is definitely a journey. We've got further to go, but that is the mission that gets me up in the morning, is getting us to that goal.
That's cool. I mean, a lot of there's sort of the other solution to that is sort of everyone figuring out how to plug into a Zapier or a Tray.io, right? And that those are sort of the geeky solutions, is trying to maybe use them as the glue if nobody's bothered to sort of create a direct pipe. So do you feel like that those organizations will continue to have a really important place in the ecosystem? Or do you think sort of the more major players, like the HubSpots of the world, will just do direct integrations with the important parts of the ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the important pieces will become direct integrations, just because there's things you can do with a direct integration that is just very hard to do when you're an intermediary between them. And don't get me wrong, I'm actually a huge fan of Zapier and Tray and that whole category. I mean, my goodness, they made the MarTech stack work, long before any other solution was there. That being said, I'm still pretty bullish on those companies, simply because the amount of software in the world is not shrinking. There was a fellow from Forrester I was chatting with who had estimated that, there's something like 175,000 SaaS products in the world today. He predicts by 2027, there'll be like 1 million SaaS products. Even if he's off by 100,000 here or there, you're like, this is a lot. And, not all of the SaaS products are going to have all of the direct integrations to all of the major platforms. And so I think having tools like Zapier or Workato or Tray or things like that, sort of say like, okay, well, whatever you have in your SaaS stack, if it has an API, we can probably help move things from point A to point B for you.
For when you're going through the decisioning process of direct integration for HubSpot, do you often sort of start with a, using one of those platforms as an intermediary if they've already sort of made themselves Zapier friendly or Tray.io friendly?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would say Zapier has long been like the most popular product in the HubSpot ecosystem, because it is that gateway to so many other products as well too. And I mean, again, for a long time, actually, the sort of very simple integrations that people would want to do, like a trigger here, take some data, pass it over there. Actually, Zapier was perfect for. I think where things start to get a little bit more sophisticated is, when people are trying to orchestrate like, workflows or sequences, or they want things to like be embedded in the user experience of the product. There just becomes things that to do them, you really do need to build natively into the platform. But yeah, my goodness, Zapier, has helped so many HubSpot customers. Still to this day, continues to help so many HubSpot customers. So I have nothing bad to say about them.
Cool. As far as the HubSpot platform itself, and I guess I would say CRM, if you want to use that as sort of the closest analogous label for sort of what HubSpot does at the core. Of course, it starts to do a bunch of other things as well, ESP-ish kind of things as well. But do you sort of see your primary markets as being B2B, B2C, and then within B2C, are there certain sort of categories where you feel like, when you're doing your own product roadmap, like, okay, restaurants want this, but we don't, they have to take a seat behind retail or whatever. How do you guys internally sort of juggle your own product roadmap? Because the kinds of things that would really appeal to one industry category don't necessarily appeal to the other, or B2B, in particular, B2B versus B2C, and the kinds of drip campaigns you would do with one versus the other, they're quite different.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. So I'd say the focus from HubSpot has very much, the emphasis has been on B2B. What's interesting is just over time, as the platform has expanded so much and has so many capabilities, we actually end up with a fair number of B2C businesses that end up using the platform. But part of that is also, to your point, not all B2C businesses are equal either. There's some of them, like for instance, a lot of these B2C businesses that, run subscription-based services, they start to look an awful lot like, some of the patterns you see with like SaaS companies and, the B2B space. And so for them, actually, it ends up that it's a really great fit. It just works really well. I would say, yeah, if there's others like, like classic e-commerce companies. I mean, like HubSpot isn't competing with Shopify. In fact, if anything, we're a partner with Shopify, yeah, I did more on the B2B side.
Right. So, obviously, HubSpot ends up in the consideration set for a lot of folks. They're trying to solve the problems that HubSpot solves. And I won't mention any of your competitors, but clearly, there are differentiators at the there are differentiators at the technical level, at the usability. I think certainly one of the things everybody I know has always appreciated about HubSpot is usability, right? Just sort of the ability to have assistant marketing managers come up to speed pretty well. But there's always the feeling that, when you start to make it easy to use, there's sometimes a bit of a trade-off in power, right? And so, that's a tightrope that product managers also need to sort of walk. And I'd love to hear how you and the team, not that that's your role or responsibility, it isn't, but I'm sure you overhear them talking about walking that tightrope between how do we find that balance between ease of use and usability and power?
Yeah, it's a very popular topic at HubSpot. So I think probably the single biggest differentiator for HubSpot is the strategy we took in building out our CRM platform is very different than some of the other competitors in this space. This was not built through acquisition. It was not built where we're like, oh, we have this product here, we'll acquire a marketing product here, we'll acquire this other thing here. And then don't worry, we've got a great PowerPoint presentation that makes it all look like one thing. Our team basically built everything in HubSpot organically, and it is all on the same underlying framework. Now, there's pros and cons to this strategy. One of the cons is this took a really long time. Like HubSpot's now like 15 years old. I'd say, okay, now we're finally at the place here where 15 years later, we've actually got a pretty comprehensive CRM platform, but we could have gotten there like much, much faster had we been willing to basically acquire these different pieces. And that was the strategy other companies took. The pro to the approach we did is that this stuff is really at the fundamental level, like all on the same architecture, it's all on the same UX, and so actually what we're able to do is there's a tremendous amount of power now in HubSpot, but because we have the luxury of it all being in the same UX system, we're able to be just really very clever about the trade-off of like, okay, well, what do you show to users? Who's a power user? Who's specializing in this marketing capability? Who wants to look at something separately just through like a sales reporting mechanism? And it turns out that you can actually then do a fair amount. It's like what do they call that? It's like a Pareto curve there, where you can actually push the frontier of how much power you can give people if you're really clever about the UX to also keep it that it's an enjoyable experience. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm just lost in a complete and total maze. But that is very much an outcome of the strategy of saying, listen, we're just not going to grow by acquisition at the product level. We're going to build this all in a unified and organic fashion. So we paid the piper for that. And now it's starting to generate its return.
Cool. Thanks so much for that. Certainly within B2B, I think to some extent, perhaps even more so than B2C at the moment, there's a lot of sort of consternation about losing some precision and accuracy of tracking as a result of third-party cookie depreciation, some changes that Apple just announced within the last week or two with regards to things being trackable within email, and the fact that certain things are sort of going to get shut down. And so you'll still have click level tracking, but certainly impression level tracking, open rates, and some of the things that marketing managers and their superiors have gotten used to seeing and reporting, which may have been sort of somewhat inaccurate before, but at least it was a good sample that you could use and sort of compare like to like and sort of say, well, this one did better than that one. Now, it's going to some extent, some of that's going out the window, right? Particularly as it relates to iOS devices. So, how do you recommend people sort of deal with that, right? That you sort of got used to some certain level of reporting, even if it wasn't, accounting level accurate. You just sort of felt like it was, at least you could do apples to apples reporting. That may be going away to some extent.
Yeah, I mean, you ask like, how do you deal with it? Well, I don't know that you actually have any choice. So we just take a deep breath. I don't know. I kind of feel like, I mean, HubSpot has tracked, some of those stats. Definitely customers take, advantage of that data. But when I think of it in the context of the total amount of activities and what people are doing and how they're engaging with folks, it doesn't feel like it's a huge lever. Yes, it was nice to have that visibility of who's seeing an email, who's opening it, but at the end of the day, you're right. What really matters is, does the person end up taking an action, from that? And yeah, all of that is still totally within the domain of like, okay, what are we focused on and making sure we're getting the right message to the right people? I think also on the advertising side, again, this clearly is going to be a shuffling experience here for a few years, partly because it's going to be interesting to just see what sort of solutions do emerge. I mean, obviously, Google's got a whole bunch of its own ideas of how it wants to manage this. Facebook has its own things it's doing. Any number of industry consortiums, and attempts to go through this. And so I think there will be other ways in which this environment evolves for how we do targeting in advertising. I think at the moment, it's really incumbent on companies like HubSpot to just keep our ear to the ground, make sure that we're understanding as new opportunities become available, what will be valuable to our customers. This is also, frankly, where the ecosystem play that I do, I think can be helpful, because it's entirely possible we may end up with many different things out there in the universe for a while until it, ultimately settles down, if it ultimately settles down, and part of taking an ecosystem strategy here is to say, perhaps there can be many different folks who create ways of interfacing to HubSpot so that, HubSpot customers can take advantage of, this network or this standard or this approach. But I think one way or the other, yeah, it's something that everyone in marketing and everyone in marketing technology, we cannot be asleep at the switch here. We've got to have our eyes open and experimenting with this and just learning what is that new normal going to be like.
Absolutely. In your roles, your various roles, you get a chance to see stuff earlier than most of the folks who are only doing due diligence for specific slices of time when they need to fix a problem. So as a result, I think you probably get to see things that may be exciting that sort of nobody knows about yet, or people haven't really thought about yet. Are there any things either categorically, perhaps better than naming specific companies, but categorically, are there any things that you're seeing coming down the pike that you're particularly excited about?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's more out there to see than even I get to see. I mean, like if you were going to do the math of say like, well, let's say Scott was going to give like 10 minutes to every MarTech, company that he came across on that graphic. If you were to add them up, like, yeah, like the year is gone. So, yes, I'm more of a sampling, than any sort of authoritative source on that. But I would say the category of things that I'm most fascinated by right now is what broadly has been called this no-code movement. And I do interpret it very broadly, where to me it's about sort of this next wave of technology that a lot of the things in the first generation of MarTech really did require experts to do all of it. In fact, even the quote unquote simple things, you still kind of needed an expert to do it for you. And this second wave of what's happening around no code seems to be about saying, there's a whole bunch of these use cases that actually we can simplify the experience of, whether it's a workflow or an app or some sort of creative asset or something like this, that a non-expert can actually use one of these tools to create it and build it and do it on their own. Now, this is a mixed bag. I mean, it's totally changing the game of, the challenges of how do we think of governance in a world where not only are there, all these tools, but now there's all these different people who can use all these different tools. And so there's work to be done on the governance side. But when I think of it just purely from an empowerment side, it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know. Like, so I am not an audio video expert of any kind whatsoever, but like I download Descript, and I can come in and I can edit a video and I can change this and magically edit copy in the video. It's just like, I feel like a wizard, like the master of the universe for this stuff. That's the sort of no code stuff. And we're just seeing this stuff populate through so many different categories in MarTech that I don't know. I think like over the next few years, wow, what the typical marketer, not MarTech-y, like marketer will just be able to do with their own two hands. It's going to be incredible.
It does sound like you're sort of predicting that there's still a lot of room for disruption, right? Because while there is a lot of, there are a lot of existing players who solve problems, the way you're describing it, sometimes they solved it in a complicated way. And that the person who comes in and solves it simply can end up being head and shoulders easier to use, maybe even if it's not cheaper, right? Maybe they can charge a premium because it's so easy to use, and now I don't need to pay for an IT-ish kind of person to sort of make it work or glue it together, et cetera. So it sounds like venture capitalists should still be placing their bets, right, on some of this no-code stuff.
And the data would suggest that they are still placing their bets. Like one of the categories, other things being equal, everyone assumes a category over time will just consolidate down to a small number of winners. And other things being equal, of course, that's true. But yeah, the challenge is it's just within these categories, it's not a once and done motion. It's this constant cyclical, and the example I always turn to is like the CMS, web platform world. I mean, that is arguably the oldest category in MarTech. It's what, like 25, 26 years old. If any category should have now been like finalized, done, mature, like no more, there's two companies, right? That's all that should be left. But yeah, you look at what's happened here over the past few years with all the innovation around headless CMS and how it's powering all these other, channels, the stuff that's happening with the Jamstack and like Gatsby.js. I mean, it's like the space is on fire with all this like innovation and disruption. And that's the oldest category in MarTech. So yeah, I think your wisdom should be taken to heart that nobody should rest on their laurels. This is very much an industry that is continuing to be an evolution.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining me. It's been really fun catching up and great learning about your continued enthusiasm for the entire ecosystem and how it dovetails with your job. So if you have any parting thoughts, I'd love to hear them, but I did want to thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my parting thought is like, don't let the MarTech landscape stress you out. At the end of the day, we started by saying the majority of it comes down to do good marketing. That's so much better than any of the tools that you can find out there. So it was great to catch up with you, Kevin. I've been a huge fan for years. So thanks for having me.